one thing that I think is important is that a lot of times we're trying to find a silver bullet to resolve our problems. And nutrition can, of course, help a lot, but people really need to think about that there's environmental circumstances, especially biosecurity. There's a lot of things that your management, and then how you feed those birds, how you look in terms of the air quality. There's a lot of things that are involved whenever you're trying to control diseases and vaccination programs. So it's a lot of things, and there is no silver bullet. It really is focusing on trying to do your best in all of the different segments for sure.
Welcome to the Poultry Podcast Show. Today I am here with Maria Terra-Long. Welcome to the show, Maria.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I'm really excited to chat about your experience in the poultry industry. But first, I want to hear how did you get into the poultry industry? What sparked your interest in chickens?
Yes, so I went to vet school in Brazil, and then I feel like everyone has a poultry story, and they never start like, oh, I always want to be a poultry vet. So mine is one of those. I actually went for small animals, but then with my first internship, I just figured out that I like small animals, not very happy with the owners. They just sometimes too crazy. And then, yes, yeah, they think they're the babies. But anyway, I just decided that I was just looking around, looking at production, and then I decided to join a poultry club. And I just fell in love with the production. I like it, how dynamic the poultry industry is, how the nutrition is very far away from other species, and then also the genetics. So I just fell in love with that, and being in the poultry industry, I'm at least trying to study since my second year of vet school, so almost 10 years already. Oh Jesus, I'm old.
Oh, that sounds really fun. I think a lot of people come to the poultry industry through many different routes, so you got a good interest in vet school, so that's pretty awesome. It's good that you had those experiences, otherwise you might be a dog and cat vet today.
Eastman serves veterinarians and nutritionists in agrochemical and animal health industries by helping them select, evaluate, and implement innovative nutritional programs. Eastman works with your team to customize your gut health approach in feed and water. Eastman's approach addresses nutritional and bacterial challenges and finds new ingredient preservation and hygiene solutions. Explore ways to accelerate and innovate your programs. Contact the animal nutrition team at eastman.com.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you got to the position that you have currently? So what you do and your path, I guess.
Yeah, so did vet school in Brazil, and then I worked in a co-op as a poultry veterinarian there for 2 years after finishing. And then while I was working, I had the opportunity to come to the US for doing my Ph.D. in poultry science. So I came here in 2019 to do my PhD, and I worked mainly with parasites, so Ascaridia galli, did a little bit of work on cocci and blackhead and histomonas, and then now I'm still working on the gut health, so working with probiotics and prebiotics for poultry.
Yeah, awesome. So can you tell us a little bit about your work with some of the different parasites that show up in poultry? That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, so it was a little bit of everything. So for the Ascaridia galli was basically my PhD research. And on that one, it was a trial for 7 months. And we were looking into alternative treatments for Ascaridia. The focus were mainly small producers, so backyard producers. So we did a setup that was similar to what they would do. And then we put on top of feed pumpkin seeds and also Artemisia absinthe. And then we did evaluation on microbiota, gene expression of cytokines, digestibility, and egg quality. And long story short, for the Ascaridia itself, it didn't have any impact to both of them. Although they do have the potential, and I really think that if it was the extract of each one of them that would have a higher concentration, they might have an impact on the worms. But what was interesting on that paper specifically was the digestibility data that we got it. So we saw that the birds that were infected and not treated, they did have a decrease of digestibility in all nutrients, especially calcium and phosphorus. And the birds that were treated, they actually maintained the same amount as the one that were not treated. So that was interesting to maintain the levels of minerals, digestibility. And then we also saw this impact on eggshell quality. So we saw that the eggshells were thicker and a little bit heavier as well. So that was interesting.
Yeah. How did you pick those different additives? Is it something that maybe was common in production already, or just backyard producers sort of thought maybe it would work and you were confirming or denying?
Yeah. Pumpkin seeds for worms is something that we hear a lot of backyards saying that this was a feedback that we got from the extension agency in Auburn. And Artemisia the same. Artemisia, the popular name is wormwood. So since the ancient Egypt, they say that it has some impact on worms. Artemisia, for people that don't know what it is, you heard about absinthe, the drinking?
Yeah.
Yeah, the one that makes people crazy. So the main ingredient for that one is Artemisia, but I promise you that the concentration that we put were low enough that no chickens had any impact on those in terms of behavior.
They weren't slower to do things or just generally more sedate.
Not that I noticed.
That is too funny. Yeah, I think it's probably good to explain those since somebody might be familiar with a different version.
Yes. Yeah, it was a safe dose. It was a safe dose.
Yeah. Oh, that's too funny. So that's pretty interesting, or that's really neat that you were able to do it's almost an extension project that some smaller producers had the question and you were able to formulate a study and look at some actual outcomes like molecular and digestibility. So that's kind of fun to see. So you can answer a question for somebody that might not be able to really fund to study themselves. That's cool.
Yeah. And we also, if you think about it, this is coming back on my first chapter. My first chapter of my thesis, we looked into the epidemic in terms of what kind of parasites are affecting a pasture poultry farm in Georgia. And then one thing that we saw is that we look at broilers, turkeys, and layers. And on the layer side, we saw Coccidia, and we also saw Ascaridia. And for both parasites, we saw this was in a year, and we saw that the higher numbers that in countings, we did also counting and countings, they were happening around between July and August. So right there at the end of summer, beginning of fall. And then we're thinking that hypothesizing that maybe is related to the temperature. So higher temperatures will had a better an impact on the cycle of those parasites. And then after the peak between end of the fall, we will see a drop going to winter. And if you think about pumpkins, the season that you see pumpkins is actually in November, so exactly on the winter. So maybe they think that pumpkin seeds work because they have on summer higher counts, and then they start using on November, and then they see a decrease of the counts, and they think, oh, it's a pumpkin seeds, but it's actually more a weather situation.
Oh yeah, exactly. So are there a lot of people that have smaller scale operations for all of those species, or are the smaller scale operations more laying hen, for example? I know a lot of smaller cities allow you to have up to 6 or so laying hens. So were you seeing the problem across all the species or mostly laying hens?
Yeah, Ascaridia galli specifically, we saw more in laying hens. Basically, is because of the length of the parasite. So it takes almost 5 weeks for you from the start to ingest the eggs to start cycling, and then broilers they're just too short. But you can see some Ascaridia on broilers, and then in terms of broiler breeders, for example, we don't see much roundworms, but there is a good amount of Heterochus, which is another one that we work a little bit in our lab.
Yeah. So, are there any, I guess, suggestions that you might have for someone to actually treat them? I mean, instead of using pumpkin seeds or Or are there other proven or effective methods that you might recommend instead of those kind of folklore methods?
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons. We also want, of course, to answer the backyard producers if pumpkin seeds will be an option in Artemisia. But there really isn't many options for you to treat worms in the US that you really can use it that doesn't have any downtime period, especially thinking about production of eggs. It's basically the fenbendazole family. And then, yeah, that's actually an area that people really need to start studying on it because we only had that drug that is authorized in the US. And in Ascaridia, we haven't seen any resistance yet. But for example, on the Ascarids that affect turkeys, there has some vets already saying that they've seen some resistance.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, so a paper that I actually read that is a suggestion to reduce these chances of selecting resistant parasites, it was basically trying to figure out what would be a good threshold in terms of oocyst count for you to really start treating the birds. Because a lot of people treat it every X month or weeks or something. And then we've seen that after you treat it, you have a decrease of the counts, but then they come back after that. And then on this paper, they try to, okay, whenever they reach this amount of oocysts, we're going to treat it. And with time, you kind of see a reduction on the load because the drug affects mainly the adults. They don't affect much of the eggs. And the eggs of Ascaris, they can actually live in the environment for up to 2 years. So that's what is the thing. You need to treat the birds, but a lot of times your problem is the environmental, not exactly the birds.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe best practice is doing the fecal egg counts. That would be pretty smart.
Yeah, it is an option, although it's something that people do a lot, but it's an option and is something that is not that hard to do. You need a microscope. It's way easier to look on a microscope for worms than, for example, for cocci. They're just bigger. The only thing that the eggs for Ascaridia, galli, and Terra-Long are the same. So you're going to see that you have worms, but you don't know which one it is. Not exactly the same, but you really need to be very, very good to do the differentiation. So we normally say this Ascaridia eggs.
Yeah. Oh, it sounds tricky.
It is. And then in our case, people were like, oh, how you know that it was Ascaridia and not a Terra-Long? We actually ran PCRs and we did necropsy at the end of the trial and we didn't look. We look on sickle and we didn't see any sickle worms, so just the roundworms. But basically for you to know, you need to run PCRs to differentiate or open the birds and see what you find.
Yeah. Which maybe isn't always possible unless the bird, passes away normally. People are pretty attached to their chickens, which is understandable.
Exactly.
What other diseases have you been working on in poultry?
Yes, so another research another project that we got involved a lot doing my PhD, and yet it was actually published last Friday. Is about Histomonas. So on that one, we look into pulled poultry farms for broiler breeders, and we set up a different sets of traps for collect as many arthropods that we can find it. So we will set up traps inside and outside the houses, and then we wanted to look on two things on this trial. We wanted to see what kind of insects or invertebrates that we're going to find inside and outside. And then after we collected and looked over a year, what are the ones that are the most common ones? And then they could be potential vectors of other diseases. And then working on parasites, we focus on Heterachus and Histomonas. Heterachus because we know that Histomonas cannot live a long time outside the host, and Heterachus end up being the accidental host for that as well.
So what did you find seasonally? Like what's the seasonality to what kind of insects or bugs you found in the barns?
Yeah, so seasonality, we didn't see much of impact inside the comparing inside and outside. Inside the house, we didn't see much. And we also the majority of the insects that we collected were outside the houses, which is good. It means that at least people were being able to, in a certain level, to control a little bit of the insects inside and avoiding them to get inside the houses. So 72% of the insects, they were more outside than inside. So inside, we didn't see much of a variation in terms of seasonality, but outside, we did see what we expected, with summer being the high amount of insects that we were seeing throughout the year. So that was interesting. And then if we also actually look on diversity of those insects, we did some alpha and beta diversity analysis. And then what we saw is that we didn't see much in terms of seasonality, in terms of alpha diversity, but we saw in terms of inside and outside, being outside with very high alpha diversity compared to inside. But whenever we look on the beta diversity, so looking on the populations on our different time periods that we collected, we did see that there was a tendency for the insects that were collected in the fall to be grouped in a side of the graphic, and then the summer and also the spring as well. So we saw this difference in beta diversity on the birds, on the insects. So that was interesting.
Yeah, cool. So did you collect any insects that you think are direct vectors for some of these different diseases, or were you able to correlate anything with the inside versus outside?
Yes. So what we did, we looked specifically on darkling beetles, because these are the ones that we hear a lot of people saying that they are potential vectors of other diseases, and they have been correlated to some bacterial ones. So we decided to run PCRs for qPCR for Terrakis and for Histomonas for the darkling beetles, and we also select some insects. The selection of the beetles, basically all of the time points that we collected, we had beetles. So we basically collected 10 beetles for each farm. So we had 2 different companies, and for each company, 2 houses, so 4 houses a total. And then for the insects, what we did, we, thinking about being a potential vector, we collected the bugs that we saw that they were inside and outside at the same time. And we tried to select the insects that we were also seeing in the 4 farms, and also most of the seasons. So that's the criteria that we came up with. And we actually also ran the PCRs, and we actually, after we saw the positive flies that we find it for Heterarchus and Histomonas, we also did sequencing on them to try to identify at least the genus of those as well.
So were any of those parasites, or I should say insects, directly linked to carrying Histomonas?
Yes. So the direct link, since we ran PCRs, it means that we identified the DNA. So I don't call them vectors, we call them potential vectors. Just because you see persistency of the DNA doesn't mean that they are actually transmitting. That will be a next step. But we did saw positive samples. So basically for the beetles, we saw that we actually had an outbreak in one house. And on the house that we had the outbreak, we saw at the time of the outbreak that there was 2 beetles out of the 10 that we evaluated. So 20% of those. One was positive for Histomonas, and the other one positive for Histomonas and Heterarchus. And 4 months after that, the outbreak, we saw 5 beetles, so 50% of the beetles that were evaluated that was positive for either Histomonas or both parasites. So we saw a persistency of this infection on the beetles, and we saw the same behavior on the flies. So the flies, we saw that at the outbreak, there were 3 flies that were positive for either Histomonas, Heterarchus, or a combination of both. And then another fly that was positive 3 months later. So seeing the persistency of the DNA parasite on the insects that we evaluated.
Yeah. So it sounds like several different insects could be carrying these diseases. It's not just like one type. It could be an issue because you've got several options or several potential vectors, right?
Yes. So that's what we discussed in the paper a lot. We still need to do a lot of research and really confirm the infection and everything. But it was interesting to see because those all the ones that were positive, they were all flies, so we call it for the diptera. All the
Mhm.
flies that we evaluated, we, as I mentioned, they were inside and outside the houses, and they were in all of the seasons that we saw, and also all of the different farms, and they were positive. While the beetles, we did see positivity as well, but an interesting fact that we saw is that basically out of all the beetles that we collected, only three, it was almost 800 beetles that we collected. Only three of them were outside the houses. The rest of them were inside the house. And
Mhm.
then whenever we look on the traps, only one beetle was in the trap that it was basically for flying insects. The other of them, they were collected in the floor.
Mm.
So what we see in the study is that the beetles, they are basically staying in the house. They are not moving
Mhm.
from house to house. So although they can't transmit a lot of diseases, we just raise the what if. What if we look on beetles because they are the ones that we see the most because they're very big to see compared to some of
Mhm.
those flies, but they are not the ones that are exactly the most important ones in transmission because they're staying in the house.
Yeah, they set up shop and they stay there.
Yes, and then of course we see a lot of beetles, and they were the insects that we saw the most. But that's one thing. Maybe just because you see a lot of them doesn't mean that they have this potential epidemiologically to be the most transmitted one, and maybe we're just overlooking on other things.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. So what are some of the projects that you're working on now?
We work a lot with yeast
Mhm.
probiotics, so yeast cell walls more specifically, and then yeast probiotics. And we also basically on the phase of learning everything, and it's very excited to see like how much research we have involved in them, and then focusing a lot on the production of production that doesn't use antibiotics. And we see in the US that is basically
Yeah,
half of the production we have in the US is antibiotic free.
yeah,
So they are good alternatives, and it's very exciting for me to be working on that part.
yeah. Yeah, so what do you have any advice for someone who might be choosing a probiotic or a yeast product? Is there are there what can you look for? I know there's a lot of options. Some of them have a single species, some have multiple. So what are the things to look for, I guess, when thinking about the probiotics that are offered?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. And as you mentioned, there really is a lot of options. Uh, for me, what you need to look at it is really on the data. So look how much data you have to back up your information, what kind of trial was done, if it was a research trial, if it was a field trial. Both trials have good valuable information.
Mhm.
So really focus on the data to see it. And once you look and you've got like your final four or final three, try it with yourself and see what works best for you, because at the end of the day it needs to be something that is gonna help the animal if you're not with performance, at least working, for example, salmonella control, reducing those loads. We see that there's a lot of pressure on the broiler side and also layers all the time to have the lower concentration as ever as possible in terms of challenges.
Yeah.
So focus on this on the data and focus on what you want to look at in terms of performance, in terms of food safety.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Are there certain environments where you see that some of the probiotic or yeast products work better? Like, would they be more useful, I guess, in an environment that has more challenges? Like, what are some of the trends that you're seeing as far as yeast goes?
Yes. So, for example, focusing on the yeast cell walls that we use a lot for salmonella control, we do see that the higher the challenge, or the bigger is going to be the drop in terms of prevalence. And another thing that we've seen is that if not only you're going to see a drop, but if you continue with time, you're going to see that your first flock, your second flock, your third flock, you're going to see a trend of reduction of the salmonella. So, which is good because then you're gonna not only have a reduction, but maintaining the product, you're also gonna maintain the lower doses for sure.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, So what's it like kind of in your current role having both the D.V.M and the Ph.D.? Like, how do you integrate those into the work that you're doing?
Oh, it's great. First, because whenever I go to a nutrition conference, I can just start with the joke. I'm a vet, so I don't know anything. And
You've done some work.
yeah, they love it. They love it. That's the best joke that you can tell to really like an icebreaker. Everyone's like, okay, so let's hear what you say. But it really is interesting. I feel like we know there is like this historical nutritionist vet versus veterinarians and what a vet is doing the nutrition work. But especially right now that we are working on alternatives to antibiotic and really start to studying the microbiota, the impact on the immune system. This is something that is right there in the middle between nutritionists and between veterinarians. And you really cannot talk about one thing without talking to the other one. You really need to integrate both. So I just feel like in the best of both worlds, on my research in my PhD, I did some microbiota trials. We also look on gene expression of cytokines. So for me, it makes sense to where I am right now. And the vet background and looking on diseases that help a lot. And also, I'm learning a lot for sure in the nutrition side. And that's the beauty of everything.
Yeah. Yeah, you get to expand both. So just from like a veterinary side, I know things kind of cycle as far as what diseases are of concern, but what are the things that people are focusing on right now that they might try to use some of these probiotics to help? Like, are there specific, other than salmonella, kind of reducing that overall, but from just a veterinary perspective, what have you seen that needs solving? Like, what kind of things are out there that are prevalent right now that need a nutritional solution?
Yes. So what I've been seeing a lot and talking with people in the field is that besides, of course, cocci problems, of course, and necrotic enteritis, we've seen a lot of diseases that are related to gut indirectly. For example, Enterococcus cecorum or dermatitis that is not exactly a lesion in the gut, but is related with bacteria translocation that is caused by a leaky gut. So I've seen a lot of research, and we do need to look on that part, on focusing on the gut health and really trying to reduce this bacteria translocation to reduce other problems that we're seeing in the field right now.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can kind of put together nutrition and also some of your veterinary background to help solve solve some of those problems. Yeah, what are some of the unique problems with broiler breeders? I know there are just general issues because it's a meat bird that is also trying, to go through reproduction and whatnot. But do you have any, I guess, ideas that are kind of specific to that segment of the industry? Not really. The broiler breeders always intrigue me just because we're asking a meat bird to reproduce, and it's just different.
Yeah, it is different, and it's basically a whole new world. I know there is a lot of concerns, just as you mentioned, making a meat bird to reproduce. So controlling the weight is something that there's a lot of issues on it. I know in terms of a nutrition side, I'm not an expert in that, but there's a lot of focus on trying to really figure out a program for the breeders to really control this weight. And then there's animal welfare concerns on that one on the top. So it's a mess.
Well, it's always interesting to have different segments of the poultry industry because there's different challenges, right, with each of those. So today, before we go into the 3 questions that we ask every guest, is there anything else that you think is important to talk about from kind of the subjects that we were on today with the different potential disease vectors or any potential ways to maybe modulate the environment to reduce those? Any other ideas to add?
Yeah, one thing that I think is important is that a lot of times we're trying to find a silver bullet to resolve our problems. And nutrition can, of course, help a lot, but people really need to think about that there's environmental circumstances, especially biosecurity. There's a lot of things that are management, and then how you feed those birds, how you look in terms of the air quality. There's a lot of things that are involved whenever you're trying to control diseases, and vaccination programs. So there's a lot of things, and there is no silver bullet. It really is focusing on trying to do your best in all of the different segments for sure.
It's integrated. There's usually not one cause, but once in a while there is. I mean, there are some good examples of specific issues, but yeah, it's integrated. I think that's sage information, especially for people trying to grow in the antibiotic-free aspect or segment of the industry.
It's time for our famous 3. When it comes to raising healthy animals, you need more than the right solutions. You need the right partner who brings decades of industry expertise and a global team to put that knowledge to work for the advancement of your operation. At Phibro Animal Health Corporation, we are proud to work with you as your trusted partner.
So we can end today with the 3 questions that we ask all of the guests. And the first question is, what is a poultry-related resource that you refer to frequently? Do you have a favorite?
That's a great question. So on LinkedIn, I really see a lot of nice pages that give you some short information about it, what is happening right now. So I saw a recent one is Modern Poultry. I really like to see what they're doing. They just started. And Poultry Health Today is another one that I've been seeing for a long time. They have a lot of videos on YouTube. So those are 2 ones that I really like it a lot.
Yeah, they up-to-date news. That's a good. Yeah, what's going on? Do you have a favorite non-poultry related book or resource?
Not non-poultry, but maybe a tip for the students since I just graduated.
Yeah.
There is this page called The Cheeky Scientist.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I don't know if you heard it, but
Yes.
they really focus on Ph.D. students and how to look for jobs and how to really sell yourself, because whenever you're Ph.D., a lot of times you just overthink and you don't know how to sell yourself. So it's just a good tip for students to check it, because they have a lot of free material, and it kind of helped me to be where I am right now.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, that's a great suggestion for resources for students or others. Cool. Awesome. So the last question is, do you have any advice for how to be successful in the poultry industry?
That's a good one. And I basically just started, but I would say not only poultry industry, but just overall try to be humble, try to focus on know what you know and know what you don't know. And if you're humble and if you're nice to people, you're going to have a lot of resources to help you out and really build a network and exchange experience. So just try to be nice.
Yeah, I think that's great advice for outside of the poultry industry as well. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been really informational. I love hearing about the different topics that people work on. So I always learn something.
Thank you for having me today.
You're welcome. Have a great rest of your day.